Batman the Animated Series is my favorite TV show of all time. It was my first exposure to Batman and to a comic book world in general. It had such an impact on me that it made me a lifelong comic book fan, and I'm one of the many people who still believes to this day that this is the best depiction of Batman and his world outside the comics, and hell, maybe even including the comics. Given that the series was so well received and it's still talked about even 30 years after it first aired, it of course has a lot of trivia, fun facts, and lore surrounding the series. It's a show with a lot of material. The first video I ever even made was an hour-long analysis of the show. So for this video, I thought it would be a fun idea to revisit the animated series by using the popular Iceberg format. While I was researching, I found this BTAS Iceberg made a couple years back by Reddit user bbiibrandon, and they used it as a basis to create a new iceberg with some more entries. So credits to bbiibrandon for his original iceberg. I will leave in the description a link to the iceberg that he had made for anyone who's interested. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with the entire iceberg concept, it's basically a way to list out facts, conspiracies, and trivia of a franchise by using an iceberg as a reference. And the deeper we go into the iceberg, the more obscure and less known the facts become. So with all that out of the way, let's get started. Harley Quinn is from BTAS. Harley Quinn is considered to be one of the most popular comic book characters around these days, but what's cool about her is that she wasn't even created in the comics. She actually first appeared in the episode Joker's Favor from the animated series, which was actually the first appearance of the Joker in the show as well. After appearing there, she was so well received that she kept on appearing on the show, and later on they decided to adapt her into the comics. And from there, she kept on appearing in other forms of media until she became as famous as she is today. But I always found cool the fact that she originated from the animated series. Mr. Freeze origin story revamp. Mr. Freeze is a character who was fundamentally changed after being reinterpreted for the animated series. He was a vastly different character beforehand, going by the name Mr. Zero and simply being a bank robber with an ice gimmick and an entirely different visual look. But after his appearance in the classic episode Heart of Ice, written by Paul Dini, he was portrayed more as a sympathetic villain who was trying to find a cure for his sick wife, who was cryogenically frozen, and whose boss was trying to abuse him, making him turn cold against the world, with the sole focus to try and find a cure for his wife, no matter the cost. This depiction of the character works so well that every single subsequent appearance of the character followed in line with this portrayal of him, and Heart of Ice even ended up winning an Emmy because it was just that good. Mask of the Phantasm. In 1993, Warner Bros. Released a movie based on the animated series titled Mask of the Phantasm, which was originally developed as a direct-to-video movie, but during its development, they decided to give the movie a little more budget and release it theatrically instead. The movie is fantastic. It serves as a great character study on Bruce Wayne and Batman, with some light adaptations of the comic book storylines Year 1 and Year 2. So if you've never seen it before, I highly recommend you do so. The New Batman Adventures redesigns. In 1997, the series had a revamp called The New Batman Adventures, which was technically a separate sequel series following the original seasons of the show, but it often gets included with the original show and later re-releases of the animated series in home video and streaming. The most notable change that happened in The New Batman Adventures would be the visual revamp that they did in order to have a more cohesive visual style with Superman the Animated Series, which was also airing at the time. The redesigns for each character are very hit or miss. Some are definitely better than others, but it didn't really detract anything from the quality of this season. The show was still great. Renee Montoya is from BTAS. Another character whose origins can be traced back to the animated series is police officer Renee Montoya, who later on got adapted into the comics and received a lot of development in the Gotham Central series from the 2000s. And during the 52 series, she would eventually even become the second incarnation of the Question. She's just an overall really cool character. Adam West is the Grey Ghost. Yet another really cool character that was created just for the show was the Grey Ghost, a veteran actor who played an in-universe superhero for television, who was idolized by Bruce Wayne as a kid, and even served as inspiration for him when creating his own Batman persona. His episode is one of my favorites from the show, and one of the best in my opinion. And an awesome and well-known fact about the episode is that Adam West was the voice actor for the Grey Ghost, which is really cool because he famously played Batman in his iconic 60s show. And the episode overall serves as a great homage to him, because it also very smartly parallels the life of the Grey Ghost with the career of the real-life Adam West and the problems with typecasting that he suffered after he played Batman in the 60s. So for that and many reasons more, it's just a really great episode. Tim Burton influence. The animated series was arguably created as a direct result of the overwhelmingly positive reception of the '89 Batman movie directed by Tim Burton. Warner Brothers wanted to capitalize on the popularity of Batman by creating a new cartoon based on him, and they heavily pushed for the new project to have a close resemblance to how Tim Burton portrayed Batman and his world. And this influence can be seen all throughout the show, like in Gotham's visual art deco look, and how it shares that gothic and dark mood with the Burton movies, and even in the design of some characters, like the Penguin for example. Bronze Age adaptations. This is a reference to the fact that a lot of the show's episodes are actually adaptations of classic Bronze Age storylines from Batman comics, like The Laughing Fish, The Demon's Quest, The Strange Case of Bruce Wayne, and many more. The Bronze Age is probably the period of Batman mythos which most inspired the show. Legends of the Dark Knight references. In the 19th episode of the new Batman Adventures, we got to see an anthology which adapted two very different interpretations of Batman, with short stories based on Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and the Silver Age incarnation of the character as drawn by Dick Sprang. It's a very fun episode, and one of the best of that final season of the show. Sub-Zero. Batman and Mr. Freeze Sub-Zero is the second movie set in the animated series world. It was intended to come out as an animated tie-in for Batman and Robin, but the poor reception of that movie made Warner change their plans, and they released the movie about a year later. And this is one of the few instances where an animated tie-in movie was better than the big budget movie it was meant to promote. Much better. The Caped Crusader. Batman the Caped Crusader is an upcoming animated show that is being worked on by Bruce Timm and a lot of people who were responsible for the original 90s animated series. J.J. Abrams and comic book writer Ed Brubaker are also going to work on the show. The series came about after Bruce Timm made an animated black and white short called Strange Days, made for Batman's 75th anniversary, which had a visual style that resembled the animated series. This sparked interest in making a new show following this style, and it is reportedly coming out next year in 2023. Mystery of the Batwoman. This is the third movie based on the animated series. It was made in 2003, well after the show already ended. The movie also marks the first time we ever got to see a version of Batwoman adapted into animation. Tie-in comics. The Batman Adventures is the name of a tie-in comic book that was published simultaneously with the show. I don't believe it's considered to be canon to the official DCAU canon, but it still had some great stories written by some of the show's writers, and Batman also appeared on other DCAU tie-in comics during that period of time. Mad Love direct adaptation. Mad Love is the story which explained Harley Quinn's origin for the first time, but a cool fact about the story is that it was actually first told in the Batman Adventures tie-in comic, and it was later adapted on an episode of the new Batman Adventures. The adventure continues. In 2020, DC started publishing a new comic series set in the animated series world titled The Adventure Continues. It's written by Paul Dini and Alan Burnett and drawn by Ty Templeton. And it's really cool because it shows characters who never got to appear in the animated series, like Deathstroke for example. Honestly, it's very good and I highly suggest you check it out. Bruce Timm is the Mad Bomber. Did you know that Bruce Timm himself actually appeared on the show? Well, technically, and that's because the main villain of the Great Ghost episode had a character design which intentionally made reference to how Bruce Timm looks, and it's pretty spot on visually. Tie-in games. Given that the animated series was a very popular show throughout its entire runtime, there were some 2D side-scrollers for the SNES, the Sega Genesis, and Game Boy Color based on the adventures of Batman and Robin, incarnation of the show. And there was also the PS2 game Batman Rise of Sin Tzu. Also, even though they are not directly related, both the LEGO Batman games and the Arkham series share a lot of the same voice actors from the animated series. Static Shock crossover. During the second season of Static Shock, both Batman and Robin appeared on the show, teaming up with Static to take down the Joker. More DCAU characters appeared on Static Shock after this, and during Justice League Unlimited, we got to see Batman and Static once again, but in the Beyond time period from the future. Batman and Harley Quinn. And this is the fourth, and at the time of me filming this, the last movie based on the animated series that has been released so far, and as the title suggests, it teams up Harley Quinn and Batman, alongside Nightwing as well, as they're trying to take down the Florinic Man. I gotta be honest, I don't really like this one. It decided to focus more on the comedy, but none of the jokes really land. But I still appreciate the fact that it kept BTAS relevant and it revived the show's world in some way. Reused original pilot. Did you know that the show's classic intro actually originated from an animated pitch made to convince studio executives to greenlit the show? It was made by Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski as a proof of concept for the series, and it showed Batman fighting against two thugs in a Gotham rooftop, a scene which was replicated for the show's opening. Live action Kevin Conroy Batman. Kevin Conroy stands to this day as a lot of people's favorite Batman actor. His portrayal and demeanor as Bruce Wayne and Batman is iconic and instantly recognizable. So much so that he's not even just a favorite Batman of people who grew up with the DCAU like me, since he was so prolific that he continued playing Batman well beyond the DCAU's end, with him portraying Batman in the Arkham video game franchise, a lot of animated movies, and he even got to finally play a live-action version of the character during the CW's Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover event between all of its Arrowverse shows. He got to play an old, jaded and dark version of Batman with an exoskeleton armor that was reminiscent of how he looked in Kingdom Come, and it was really cool to finally see Kevin Conroy play a live-action version of Bruce Wayne. I, like most of you watching this, was really saddened by the recent passing of Kevin Conroy. It still feels completely surreal, because as I said, he is my personal Batman. Ever since I started reading Batman comics as a kid, whenever I read Batman, I heard Kevin Conroy's voice. I still do. And for the rest of my life, I will always hear his voice when reading Batman stories. And I know for a fact that I'm not alone on that one. I'm really grateful though, that we got to experience his amazing performance as Batman throughout many years. And even though he passed away, in a sense he continues to be with us through his amazing and passionate body of work. Tim Curry was originally the Joker. Speaking about iconic actors and performances, Mark Hamill is generally regarded as one of, if not the greatest Joker portrayal. But did you know that he wasn't even meant to play the character originally? He had originally auditioned for another role, and it was actually Tim Curry, the OG Pennywise himself, who was casted as the Joker at first. Curry even got to voice an entire episode as the Joker. But after they let Mark Hamill take a stab at the role, they were so enamored with his performance that they decided to give him the role of the Joker instead. Gotham Girls. During the early 2000s, Warner Brothers actually made some Flash cartoons using the DCAU art style and aesthetic. They made a Lobo show, and they even made a series called Gotham Girls, showing the misadventures of Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, Batgirl, Renee Montoya, Zatanna, and Catwoman, with appearances from other DC characters such as Commissioner Gordon. Catwoman spin-off. Even though Catwoman had a prominent role throughout BTAS, and she also ended up appearing in Gotham Girls later on, Warner had actually considered giving her her own animated spin-off to capitalize on the success of Batman Returns and Michelle Pfeiffer's performance as her. The development of the show didn't really get that far, but they did make a few concept arts that show a slightly different design from her gray suit look in the animated series, and resembled more her look in Batman Returns. Chase Me. Despite Catwoman not getting her own show in the end, she did end up having an animated short called Chase Me, which was included as a side feature in Mystery of the Batwoman home video's release. And what's really cool about this short is that it doesn't have any dialogue. It's very unique and worth checking out. Black Canary Catwoman crossover. Continuing with Catwoman subjects, one of the most well-known, cancelled episode ideas for the show included a very cool episode idea about a crossover between Black Canary and Catwoman. The show's writers pitched the idea to network executives, but they rejected the concept once they realized that Robin wouldn't appear at all during the episode. They were really adamant about using Robin as a way to appeal to younger demographics, so they wanted all episodes to include him in some way. And due to this, we never got to see this great episode idea being made. Joker is Jack Napier. This is another example of BTAS being influenced by the Tim Burton films, given that even though in the comics the Joker doesn't really have a set name or origin, in the '89 movie, Joker was given a real name, Jack Napier, and he was actually portrayed as a small-time mob enforcer who ends up being chemically scarred. And the Joker from BTAS follows closely that portrayal, also depicting him as a mobster named Jack Napier who falls into a vat of acid and becomes the Joker. Harley Quinn soap opera inspiration. Harley Quinn as a character was conceived by Paul Dini after being inspired by the performance of Arlene Sorkin in the soap opera Days of Our Lives, where she appeared as a Harley Quinn jester in a dream sequence. Arlene Sorkin and Paul Dini actually attended college together, and once they conceived Harley Quinn for the show, they even got Arlene Sorkin to provide the voice of the iconic character she inspired. Batman Arkham. Batman Arkham is a cancelled animated movie which would have been set in the animated series world. They were considering making the movie after the release of Sub-Zero, but they decided not to follow through with the project in the end. The movie would have been about a massive breakout happening in Arkham Asylum, putting up Batman against most of his rogues gallery. This is a project that I actually already discussed in another video, where I go through every single cancelled DC animated movie, at least that we know about. So if you're interested in hearing more about this particular entry, I'll leave a link in the description just in case you want to check it out. Lost episode. As mentioned before, BTAS had a lot of video games based on it, but a really cool fact about one of them is that the Sega Genesis version of The Adventures of Batman and Robin actually included some original video game cutscenes made by the show's creators, and they even had the voice cast of the show reprise their roles for the game's cutscenes. All of these cutscenes combined are often referred to as the show's Lost episode, and you can even watch it right now complete on YouTube. Slavery episode. The episode titled The Forgotten focused on Batman getting amnesia and being held as a slave in a human trafficking operation where homeless men in Gotham are being kidnapped and later forced into hard labor. It's often referred to as the slavery episode within the fandom, and it stands as a memorable episode for tackling such a dark concept in a show for young audiences. Series Bible. A series Bible is essentially an outline for a TV show. It's a document that's used by screenwriters as a reference point for information and descriptions on the world's settings, characters, and plot lines. And it's also used as a pitch to actually get the show made. Around 2011 or so, the series Bible for the show was actually posted online, and a few interesting details were revealed in the 153 pages of the document. For example, it included descriptions for some episodes that were never made in the end. It had synopses for episodes we did get to see in the final show, but that were originally somewhat very different. Like the Mad Hatter, for example, was originally going to be depicted more like the Silver Age version of the character, where he was a bank robber who used hats as a gimmick, and the series Bible also included backstories for characters that were never explained in the final show, for characters like Rene Montoya, the Penguin, and Catwoman. Overall, the series Bible is an awesome piece of the animated series legacy, and again, I will leave a link to the document in the description just in case you want to check it out, because it's definitely a fun read. Rejected episodes. So, we've already went through some scrapped ideas that were detailed in the series Bible, but those were ideas that the show's writers had before the show was airing. This entry, however, is specifically referring to episode ideas that the show's writers had throughout its many seasons while the show was already being aired, but were rejected for some reason or another. We actually already went over one of these ideas, that being the Catwoman and Black Canary crossover we never got to see. And for this iceberg, I made individual entries just for the most interesting episodes or the ones that we have more info about, such as that one for example. But there are a lot of scrapped episodes and concepts. For example, Paul Dini has mentioned in the past that he wanted to make an episode where Poison Ivy controls Swamp Thing. There was a scrapped episode with Batman infiltrating and breaking out of prison. There was also going to be a What is Reality sequel episode with a Riddler in a coma, and a whole lot more episodes really. The channel Watchtower Database has actually made 2 videos focusing solely on most of these rejected episodes that we know about, and it's very well made. So if after watching this video you still want to learn more, I'll leave a link in the description with their videos for you to check out. Joel Schumacher is canon. During the previously mentioned Legends of the Dark Knight episode, there was a brief cameo that showed a kid with long hair under a sign that said Shoemaker, and was talking about a Batman suit that sounded a lot like the Batman and Robin suit, obviously referencing that movie's director, Joel Schumacher. Nocturna. Nocturna is a villain that was created in the 80s. She's a character who originally was introduced as a pale-skinned thief with hypnotic abilities, but in later incarnations, she was actually depicted as a vampire. And what's interesting about her is that she would have been the main focus of a cancelled 2-part episode of the show, where Batman would have turned into a vampire after a fight with her. Batman has turned into a vampire in the comics before, but this idea proved to be too violent and dark for network executives to approve this episode. And what's awesome about this one is that Nocturna is one of the few characters who almost appeared on the show who also had some concept art made for her, so at least we can see how she would have looked like in the series. The Gun Story. One of the most interesting cancelled episodes that we know about is The Gun Story, which would have been an episode about the gun that killed Bruce Wayne's parents. It would have focused on the gun's entire existence, starting by showing the gun being created, how it got into the hands of a mobster who ended up killing the Waynes, and how the gun was continued to be used in other crimes throughout the years until Batman actually got a hold of it and destroyed it. It definitely sounds like an amazing episode idea, and it's a shame that we never got to see it. The Sandman crossover. Did you know that the Sandman was actually going to appear in BTAS? And in the graphic novel Batman: A True Dark Knight Story, written by Paul Dini, he documents his time working on the show, and he gives a description of what this episode's plot would have been about. focusing on Batman being badly hurt in a fight against a group of his most dangerous villains working together and barely escaping in a critical condition. He loses consciousness and ends up meeting with Death and Morpheus, where they debate with him on whether or not he wants to finally rest or to wake up and continue fighting his mission. We never got any official reason as to why they rejected this episode idea. The concept might have been a bit too fantastical for BTAS at that time, given that this episode idea was being worked on early in the show around its first or second seasons, and they didn't really do many supernatural plots in the show at that time. But in any case, if they ended up making this episode, it surely would be remembered as one of the show's best episodes today. Gentleman Ghost and Calendar Man. Two of the most interesting characters that the series Bible revealed to have almost appeared on the show were Gentleman Ghost, who appeared in the original episode idea for the Batman and Satana team-up episode, and also Calendar Man was planned to appear on the show. The Creeper in Season 2. Despite the character appearing in the new Batman Adventures, the Creeper was originally meant to appear in the second season of the show, and we actually have a concept art of him drawn in the classic original BTAS style. Super Friends: The Fear. The animated series stands as one of the biggest examples of DC and Warner trying to change the public's perception of Batman as a darker character, given that for years and years, the most well-known depiction of the character was the campy Adam West version. However, there was surprisingly an early attempt of trying to depict Batman in a darker story outside the comics. During the mid-80s, there was an episode from Super Friends called The Fear, which focused on Batman having a fight against the Scarecrow, where he inhales fear toxin and starts hallucinating the traumatic night where his parents were murdered. This episode was much darker than the typical episode from the Super Friends. It was written by Alan Burnett, who went on to work for the animated series in the 90s and for more DCAU shows, and this episode also stands as the first time outside the comics where the murder of Batman's parents were shown on screen. Silent Night. And finally, one of the coolest cancelled episode ideas in my opinion is a concept for an episode completely without dialogue, which would have been called Silent Night. The episode was rejected in the end, as you can imagine, but the Chase Me short they did years after didn't have any dialogue just like this concept, and the idea alone of an episode like this makes me fantasize about Genndy Tartakovsky making some kind of Batman project. Like, imagine a Batman episode in a similar style to Samurai Jack, with no dialogue and a focus on atmosphere and mood. It'd be so cool, I swear. And there you have it. That was the Batman the Animated Series Iceberg. This is by no means a definitive list of all the cool facts from the animated series. It's just an iceberg I made for fun, with all the obscure information that I personally know about the show. So by all means, if you know any fun facts that you feel should have been included in the iceberg, please let us know in the comments, and just let us know what you think about the animated series in general. In any case, I really had a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you watching the video. Thank you so much.